Greetings, travelers. I am your humble tavern keeper, here to welcome you to the Wicked Scoundrel. Located in a caravan district of exotic brothels and armed tax collectors. Parked between a stinking oxen pen and an abandoned potter's workshop. You have arrived at the last inn in the multiverse, the tavern at the end of time. Pull up a seat, grab a drink, and enjoy a tale of adventure. Tonight's story will begin shortly, but first we have some business. In honor of our protagonist at his arming ceremony, our drink special this evening will be Prosecco. A fresh, light, sparkling white wine from Italy that pairs well with toasted breadsticks brushed in honey, and of course, a celebration. Unfortunately, there aren't very many champagne flutes left at the end of time, but there are a surprising number of test tubes, so we make do. If you would like to know the drink specials in advance, they are available on our Patreon, and of course, please enjoy them responsibly. Now, this story may contain descriptions of adult themes including violence, coarse language, cannibalism, and hallucinations, so audience discretion is advised. The story itself has been pre-recorded and edited for time, and as such, there may be minor discrepancies between the written versions and the recorded ones. If you would like to read along with this story, you can do so at thewickedscoundrel.com, or get them 4 days in advance by supporting us over on Patreon. The link is in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube or Twitch, you may notice subtle changes throughout the video. These are temporal anomalies that appear to be the direct result of Nazire's decisions in Barasea. The Wicked Scoundrel is not on traditional forms of social media like Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, so if you enjoy this content, please like, follow, subscribe, and share on your preferred platform. And finally, after 14 years in the fighting pits of Bacot, a young dragonborn gladiator about to be crowned as the city's seasonal champion and graduate to a full-fledged member of Bacon society. Travelers, the Wicked Scoundrel is pleased to celebrate this auspicious occasion with our third episode from the series Nazire of No Clan. This is the Baker of Bad Omens. Hurrah, Forticella 754. He stood in the darkness, his back against the cavern wall, trying to slow his breathing to keep it from echoing in the emptiness. The exit lay 80 feet in front of him, but he knew the gate would remain closed as long as his final opponent still lived. He listened for the gentle footsteps on the gritty cavern floor, but heard only the last gurgled breaths of the man who lay in the dirt some 40 feet behind him. Quietly he crouched to the floor, found a small stone, and tossed it into the darkness on the far side of the cavern, hoping to draw out his opponent. The reptile stepped around the corner of the cavern wall, not 8 feet away from him, and fired an arrow into the dark corner. He heard the noise. With a roar from his crouched position, Nazire lunged forward with his axe. Approaching from the side, he caught her under her arm and carved a deep gash across her chest. With a wail, she retreated backward, putting one arrow into Nazire's abdomen and another between two ribs of his indigo-scaled chest as he tried to follow. The dragonborn roared, and electricity shot from his open maw, arcing off nearby stalactites and striking the reptilian in the torso. She twitched and seized as Nazire continued to rush her. She was able to put one more arrow into his thigh before his axe cleaved deep into the side of her face. Nazire released the axe as the reptilian's smoldering corpse slunk to the floor. He stumbled back towards the middle of the room and threw his fists into the air, looking towards the ceiling and the arcane glyphs that glowed there. With a great and beastly roar, He pumped both fists again. There was a heavy clunk behind him, and the grinding of gears and stone as the door opened. Nazire made his way towards the growing chant that came from outside of the cavern.
Nazire! Nazire!
The audience chanted as the Dragonborn exited the cavern into a 300-foot arena, arms raised high, as his eyes adjusted to the daylight to see the crowd 2 tiers high, cheering, chanting. Even with 3 arrows still protruding from bloody wounds, the shirtless Dragonborn turned around to see them, pumping his arms to embolden their cheers further. The fighting pits of Bacot were renowned throughout Barasea and Barasea for producing the greatest warriors in both realms. Even directly out of their arming ceremonies, these gladiators were highly sought by kings and queens to marshal their armies, and the crowds at these events were often gilded with royalty. This imported regalia made the arena resemble a golden crown atop an otherwise bleak and barren city. For Nazire, a tiny figure at the far end of this blinding bowl of gold fixtures and jewel-colored robes, the sight was surreal and whelming. The sun beamed down, warming him, and a fresh breeze caressed his scaled skin, carrying with it the taste of honey and the smells of freshly baked bread, roasting meats, and other wonderfully fragrant delights. 14 years he had known only the cold, harsh darkness of the pits. As he stood here, arms out, soaking in the applause, he realized his true prize was this new life above ground and its sunny warmth. When he had turned completely about, Nazire stepped to the edge of a 100-foot square pool set into the ground before him. Beneath his toes, the pool was filled with a wax replica of the very cavern he had just exited, carved with such intricate detail as to include the bodies of those who had just been slain and the guards sent in to retrieve them. Beyond it, at the far end of the arena, on a raised platform, sat the governing body of Bacot. The council head, the great Candelier Alana, was a tall elven woman in her 60s. Her long red hair was tied up into a messy bun. She wore a simple gold necklace with a glinting pendant, and an off-white linen dress covered with a white apron. She stood, signaling 2 guards who approached Nazire. One stripped him of his weapons, while the other pulled the arrows from him and sealed his wounds with a poultice of herbs and honey. Together, they placed a manacle about each of his wrists that nearly covered his forearms. Attached to each drug 10 or more feet of chain. Alana stretched out a hand with her palm down, making a slow, sweeping motion, and the sculpture at Nazire's feet melted into a pool of molten wax. The council head turned her palm up to the sky and folded the fingers towards herself, as if beckoning the warrior forward, and the molten wax formed and hardened into an ornate footbridge across a moat of bubbling wax. Nazire stepped confidently onto the bridge, still enticing the crowds as he crossed, dragging the long steel chains with him. Bees buzzed about him from the many hive boxes that lined the arena, but they seemed uninterested in the goings-on of those in attendance. He continued across the bridge, and the loose ends of the chain dropped heavily into the wax moat. As a traditional show of strength, he held his arms high against the jolting weight, enticing more cheers from the crowd. He continued, and the resistance of the thick molten moat and the swift buildup of wax on the chains soon slowed his progress. But he dug his toes in, leaned forward, and pressed on. When he stepped back onto the sand at the end of the pool, he did so dragging 2 mighty boulders. He pressed forward, and the wax buildup sloughed off the chain as it exited the moat. But a thick film remained, which hardened and bound him from stepping more than 8 feet beyond the pool's edge. The council descended a small staircase to join him on the sandy arena floor. On Elena's right stood the helm of the Gladiators Guild, Bacot, an elven man in his 60s, who Nazire knew all too well as the Butcher of Bacot. He stepped forward, a slender man of nearly 6 feet, in leather armor spotted with aged bloodstains, over which was tied a white butcher's apron. The crowd quieted as he called out in a commanding voice.
Nazire!
He paused a moment to let the last of the crowd quiet and retake their seats. He walked in a slow procession about Nazire, keeping the barbarian at arm's length. And though his words were directed at the champion, they were shouted to the audience. You were thrown to the pits, a worthless, mewling, orphaned, clanless, dragon-born whelp. He added emphasis with each insult to increase their offensiveness, and ended the sentence standing back to back with the restrained gladiator. Nazire considered the many ways he could take advantage of this. A simple back kick would send the man into the molten wax below. With a flick of his wrist, he could take out the elven man's knees, or wrap the chain about his neck and strangle him before the thousands in attendance. Being well mentored, however, Nazire knew this to be a test of his civility, to be presented with a vulnerable opponent, and not simply murder him. Community requires both collaboration and sacrifice, Garcon had taught him. We live, work, and die, hand in hand, for the greater good of Barasea in general, and Bacot in particular. Of course, Nazire also knew the Butcher of Bacot to be the single most skilled warrior he had ever met, and he was never vulnerable. Garcon took a breath and continued, stepping over the Dragonborn's restraint to continue circling him.
And at that time, what did you deserve? Nothing, my butcher!
Nazire shouted triumphantly, the crowd cheering back and rear.
And what did I give you?
Garcon asked, standing at Nazire's left, but still presenting his back to the chained dragon.
Scraps, my butcher!
Nazire shouted, and again the crowd cheered. And what did you do for those scraps? He continued circling, ending the question facing Nazire. The Dragonborn looked Garcon in the eyes and hissed,
I fought, my butcher.
The crowd roared. The elven man smiled. Yes, you did. Then turned away from him and continued to circle Nazire a second time. And when you won that fight, what then did I give you?
Meat, my butcher.
Nazire roared again, pulling against the chains.
Meat from the butcher!
The crowd chanted in unison, ending in more cheers and applause. And what did you do for this meat? The elven man continued his preamble at arm's length.
I worked, my butcher.
Nazire pulled again at his chains, knowing the guildmaster stood between them at his back. This was another traditional show of force, to indicate that even bound, even to those he could not see, was still a threat. In traditional response, the guildmaster waited with a patient smile for the crowd to silence, to show that he would not be intimidated. Why do you fight for scraps and work for meat. The elven man's voice took on a mocking tone as he stepped over one of the binding chains to continue his preamble. I fight for scraps, to show I am worthy of this life, Nazire shouted. But the crowds did not respond. Instead, they whispered amongst themselves in hushed tones. I fight for scraps, to show I am worthy of this life, Nazire shouted. But the crowds did not respond. Instead, they whispered amongst themselves in hushed tones. I work for meat, he paused, pretending to lose the words in order to build anticipation. The crowd sat anxious and bated. To make it worth living, he bellowed, and the crowd erupted with cheers and applause. The guildmaster returned to face Nazire again, and waited for the cheers to diminish. He continued in a commanding tone. And how will you know your life was worth living? He locked eyes with Nazire, awaiting his response. By the marbling of my meat, my butcher. Nazire brought his voice down as well, maintaining the solemnity of the moment. How does one build in this life that marbling that is so reveled in death? Rackham's eyes looked with focus and intent deep into Nazire's. Through labor and celebration, my butcher. Explain yourself, the elf commanded. Through labor, I will make myself hearty and a worthy meal for any warrior. Nazire paused to wet his lips. Through celebration, I will be seasoned with joy and companionship. From the two, I will become a worthy champion to fight at your side, or a worthy meal to nourish you for the battle ahead. The guildmaster smirked and turned from the gladiator. Again he circled Nazire, this time in silence. When he stepped between the wax-covered chains that bound the dragonborn, he spoke again. You present yourself a champion! Have you a bounty to offer? Nazire responded by pulling hard on his restraints, lifting the chains taut and dropping them to the ground in heavy clunks 3 separate times. Large chunks of beige wax flaked from the steel links, but the ends remained fastened inside the edge of the pool. A Goliath in a studded leather kilt walked forward into the space between the council and Nazire, cradling the dead reptilian in his arms. Behind him followed 2 other gladiators, carrying additional bodies, the other contestants from this challenge. The bodies were laid respectfully at the foot of the council, and when the last gladiator had placed his burden, he looked to them. My butcher, the gladiator said, with a slight shake in his voice. Nazire recognized him as the winter champion from the same ceremony 2 months prior. A huge half-orc with a long scar across his chest. He cleared his throat and continued. He has not even a weapon, but we have found these bodies at his feet. Without a word, he turned and joined his colleagues among the bees near the wall. Nazire, do you present these beasts as your bounty? The elven man asked Nazire, who remained silent. The winter champion stepped forward, and with a little more confidence than he previously declared. My butcher, these are not beasts, proven warriors. He stepped back into his position again. Nazire, of no clan, you deign to feed the people of Bacot. With the blood of your enemies? There was an intended disgust in the guildmaster's voice. Nazire smiled. What better to nourish the meek and humble in the heart of a warrior? There was a rich depth and conviction to his words. With a flourish, the slender elven man turned to the audience.
Good people of Bacot!
His voice was bold and serious.
This champion offers the hearts of warriors to feed you. Do you accept his bounty?
Meat from the butcher! The crowd responded amid cheers and applause.
The people have accepted your bounty, and they challenge you to be a champion of Bacot, the guildmaster returned. Will you accept this challenge?
Yes! Nazire hissed, leaning forward and pulling his chains taut.
Then Nazire, champion of Bacot.
The guildmaster paused, feeling the anticipation of the crowd. He finished by breaking with tradition, and in his normal speaking voice, he asked with a smile, "Why are you still in those fucking chains?"
Nazire roared, dug in his toes, and threw his weight forward, yanking at the chain manacled to his right foot.
The beige wax binding the chain to the stone interior of the pool exploded, sending shards of hardened wax flying. The loose chain flailed in the air and fell to the sand behind him. The manacle there, not having been clasped properly, blew open, just as it released from the wax binding on the opposite end. Wax chunks flew as he lurched forward. The loose chain coiled in the air and slammed into the back of Nazire's head. Nazire opened his eyes. The early afternoon sun was blinding, and the silhouette over his face was blurred. A voice reached out, as if through water. He focused on it, trying to make out what it said amongst the noises of what sounded like geese. He focused hard, tuning the voice clearer, as Bacot above him came into focus. A hand clutched his and pulled him to his feet amid cheers and laughter. "You good?" the guildmaster asked him, patting him roughly on the back. Nazire looked about, his ears ringing with confusion, as he pieced together what had happened. Two guards approached, one to release the manacle about his wrist, while the other collected the binding that lay coiled at his feet. "Shall we continue?" the elf asked, as the guards presented him with chains. Nazire nodded and was led, still dizzy, to stand before the four members of the Council of Three. To the left of Alana stood Angeline, an elderly tiefling woman. Her curly black hair was held back with a handkerchief that tucked neatly under her arms. She wore a broad, semi-toothless smile and a simple red dress of linen. In her left hand she leaned on a wooden cane, and on her right wrist she carried a small basket of apples. Though no longer on the Council of Three, Angeli still held a position of authority and respect in the community and as an advisor to the council. She stepped forward, placed her palm on Nazire's chest, and closed her eyes. Warmth like sunlight coursed through his veins, and he felt a brief twinge of pain, followed by intense itching at the site of each of his wounds, which closed before his eyes. His hand involuntarily reached to scratch the wound in his leg, just as it closed. "Yes," the elderly druid giggled. "That's gonna itch for another hour or so." She moved a half step back, removed a small linen bag slung across her body, and held it up. Nazire lowered his head to allow her to hang the bag about his neck and across his body. "Champion, I gift you wisdom." She pulled an apple that was past its prime from the basket on her wrist. Wisdom of the past. She placed the apple in his new shoulder bag and produced a beautifully ripe red apple. Wisdom of the present, she continued, placing that apple in his bag and retrieving a small green apple that had yet to ripen from the basket. And wisdom of the future. She placed the third apple in his bag. With a pat on the cheek and no further explanation, she hobbled away and took a chair on the sideline among the bees. Champion, I gift you light, that it may guide you in dark times. She stepped back with a kind smile. Bacot had returned to his place at the candelier's side, waiting to present the cast-off chains and manacles, which now draped in his arms. To his right stood the newest member of the Council of Three, Bene. The lean, half-elven albino man, in his 30s, stepped forward. He wore black leather goggles, light brown linen work clothes covered with a white apron. Though it was unknown to Nazire, Bene's position on the council was a matter of much controversy. Though he'd been granted the gift of divination at a remarkably young age, and with a remarkable degree of accuracy, his predictions since his appointment had had the distinction of being consistently ill portents. In fact, over the last few years, it had not become uncommon among the people of Bacot to guard oneself against taking advice from the baker of bad omens. Champion, I gift you fertility. May the seeds you sow yield bountiful harvests and bold children. Bene said in murmured and mumbled words, holding out a small loaf of bread, heavily crusted in seeds, grains, and oats, which Nazire accepted graciously. Bacot stepped forward with the chains and manacles. Please, champion, the baker interrupted. Eat of this loaf as a blessing to the celebration of the sowing seeds of Sela, he urged, breaking with what was traditional for the ceremony. Bacot took a quiet, restraint-filled sigh and nodded subtly to Nazire. To make up for the awkward interruption to the traditional proceedings, Nazire made a show of it, raising the loaf high in the air to the cheers of the crowd, and then lowering it and taking a large, animalistic bite from its center. With the loaf in one hand, he threw both hands into the air to entice the crowd and give himself time to chew and swallow. Bene stepped back and bowed his head with a somber smile. Champion, I gift you responsibility. May the weight of these chains remind you of the responsibility that you owe to the people of this realm and the citizens of Bacot. Nazire's head swirled, and he stumbled backwards as a vision of a half-elven couple arguing flashed through his mind. He felt the hand of the guildmaster gripping his forearm to hold him steady. And I proclaim you, Nazire of Bacot, Spring Champion. The voice of the guildmaster echoed in his head, alongside that of a foreign man and a woman, screaming in terror and agony.
Dead man, you mean fucking dead man?
While images of an elderly human woman in the throes of passion flashed through his mind.
And I armor this axe.
Nazire reeled, dropping the chain and flailing for balance. Goes in. A vision of steel bars, of a jail cell or dungeon slammed into his head, garbled together with more voices. Don't worry, I'm going to get it. He fought to clear his vision, his open eyes blinded by sunlight and steel shields, while his closed eyes became enraged with the gentle glow of two moons. What a curious phenomenon. Nazire opened his eyes. The oiling morning sun was blinding, and the silhouette over his face was blurred. A voice reached out, as if through water. He focused on it, trying to make out what it said among the noises of what sounded like children playing. He focused harder, tuning the voice clearer as the figure above him slowly came into focus. "Butcher? Sorry, friend, no butchers here, just us fishermen." A hand clutched his and pulled him to his feet. "Name's Skellen. Welcome to Honey." Well, I hope you enjoyed our third episode and our first tale of an adventure from Nazire of No Clan. Once again, that story was pre-recorded and edited for time. We will be back again in the next few weeks with our next episode, where we'll meet a young half-orc refugee from the hills beneath the Citadel spires. Until then, you can check out thewickedscoundrel.com for more stories and maybe some merchandise. To support the channel, like and share the broadcast, follow or subscribe to the channel, or support The Wicked Scoundrel on Patreon. Once again, the links are in the description. Thank you once again for joining us at the tavern this evening. We look forward to seeing you again soon.